What if your brain isn't broken? What if it's just been really, really well trained? And the reason you feel stuck in rumination, low confidence, or procrastination is because you've been accidentally strengthening the wrong neural pathway with your current lifestyle. So in this video, I want to talk about these three things: why habits can feel so hard to make, the two pathways that either promote self-criticism or shut it off completely, as well as the best activities that you can perform to not only turn down the volume of the self-critic, but also speed up your brain's ability to reshape itself simultaneously. When I began studying neuroscience and psychology, I was 20 years old, and I felt like I was stuck in a pattern that wasn't serving my highest ambitions. I had insecurity, I was struggling with confidence, insomnia, as well as going through rounds of antidepressants to try to give myself that boost. But more importantly, I created an identity around feeling like I was unlucky and I didn't have control over my circumstances because I wasn't blessed with social skills or charisma. But I also know that those were just labels that I used to create an identity around why I couldn't be who I wanted to be, to keep me stuck in this pattern that wasn't serving me. And so eventually this actually became a blessing and a really good thing, because having learned all that, I was forced to evolve and grow into a better version of myself, which eventually led me to studying these topics even more deeply as I went through my doctorate level of education as a physical therapist. And so I find that same kind of pattern in the people that I've worked with for the past 10 years in a personal training setting, as well as patients in a physical therapy setting. Because it's very hard not to be stuck in a survival mode of thinking when you have depression, or you're having low confidence and insecurity and having physical pain, which adds to everything else on top of it. And it takes a lot of energy to retrain your brain so that you can grow and strengthen these new pathways and then let the old ones die off and fall away. So let me give you an example as to why habits feel so hard to make. And in this process, I'll kind of touch on some of the later topics that we'll discuss in terms of the two pathways that I mentioned earlier. So they're going to interrelate a little bit during this. So imagine there's a big grass field, and on one side you have a dirt trail that's already created. And so you have to walk this pathway every day. And on that one side where there's already a dirt trail, we can call that the default mode pathway. And it's much easier to walk down that path, and it becomes more automatic because you've done it so many times and it's so easy to do so that you don't have to expend a whole lot of energy to get from one side of the field to the next. But if you decide to take a different way, it's going to take much more effort and energy to get to the other side. And so if you go down that second pathway off to the left, every step that you take is going to create an imprint into the grass, right? And depress it every time. But here's the thing. If you only do that once, you won't notice that path very well the next day. It's only until you repeatedly go down that second pathway over and over until that depression turns into grass being removed, until eventually over time you have a new dirt pathway. And so you could see how if at any time you stop taking that harder trail, the one that takes even more effort to perform, eventually the grass will go back in and you won't have that trail anymore. And that's how the brain works, by rewiring itself and only creating stronger connections in the brain or pathways the more it has been repeated and the more it has been used. So I'm going to add another study that I read a while back that showed that there was two people at the bottom of a hill. One was in very good shape and the other one was out of shape. So the fitness level was in question. Now the person that had a higher fitness level rated the incline of the hill as less steep than the person who was in less shape. And that may not seem like much, but in reality, the brain in the person who is less fit was perceiving the slope as more steep, and therefore they would have to exert a whole lot more energy to go up it. So in a way, there was this defense mechanism that's built into the brain that says, that's going to be too hard, don't do it. We're going to expend too much energy going up this hill. So let's create some stories or some reasons why we shouldn't have to do that, to then conserve as much energy as possible that we could use for other things in life that are going to be more easy. So as I touched on before, pathway 1 that I referred to as the default mode is pathway 1 in the brain, called the default mode network. Now, this relates to that dirt path because you can think of this as your brain being in idle. So this is the wakeful rest state of the brain, but the other side of it is, this is when we are caught in rumination, in self-introspective thinking, and even our comparison with one another and ourselves, and the things that we did in the past or the things that we have to do in the future. And the interesting part about these two pathways is it acts more like a seesaw, in a switch in a way. When one's dominant, the other one is less active. When the other one is active, the other one is turned off, and vice versa. Now, sometimes there can be some troubles that arise with this when in people that have even more severe depression or anxiety disorders, because the default mode, right, the dirt path that is very easy to go down and doesn't take much effort or energy at all to be turned on, is always active even when it shouldn't be. And so the other pathway is called the task positive network, or the task positive pathway. And more simply, this is when you are engaged in flow. And this is where the valuable part comes in. Because when you are so engrossed in that activity that you lose track of time and space, you fail to exist. There is no more you to feel judgment. All that exists is the task that you're getting carried away in. So the next time you feel like you are stuck in rumination, whether it's scrolling, overly critical self-analysis, ask yourself, am I in idle right now? And am I in the default mode? And how can I switch this to put my brain in drive to now move in a forward direction, to exert my energy and my attention and focus on a task that I can get lost in? And this is important to notice because, as I mentioned before in the walking through the field analogy, the more repetitions you perform in the default mode pathway, the stronger that it gets, so that the more automatic it becomes in the future. And the same is true for the task positive, although it's a little different because the default mode is, as it sounds, the default state. That is your brain at rest. So it takes more effort and energy for you to switch from default mode into action in task mode. But the more often you are aware of that, and you choose to now switch into task mode and get lost in these activities, the more you strengthen those neural pathways, and that is you creating deeper and deeper footprints into path number 2 through the grass to eventually create two dirt trails that become equally as easy to walk down and is equally automatic to perform when you choose to. So as I related to the two pathways before, let's think about the activation of those two pathways as step number 1. But in order to ingrain those activities and strengthen those pathways even deeper, let's instead look at it as growing a garden. And when you set out to grow a garden, there's going to be three elements that need to be in place to sustain the most optimal growth. And the first is nutrients. And in this case, we're talking about neurotransmitters and neurotropic factors that act as the basic building blocks to support that growth. Second is the watering. And these become the activities that you perform to activate and strengthen. And there are three things that you can do, but the two best activities that you can implement into your routine, the weekly routine, is going to be exercise and meditation for a couple reasons. But one, every time you do those two things, you're activating the task positive network. So you have step one, activating the pathway. The other thing is exercise and meditation have been shown to increase those same building blocks and flood your brain with the nutrients that they need to grow new pathways. Also, you are now reaffirming to yourself and creating this new identity around being the person that actually does that thing, right? You are the one that is now actually performing these actions and making positive changes in your life to become a better version of yourself. And lastly, anything that you do that you enjoy, that is highly creative, that you find that you can get into a flow state more easily and more deeply, those should be some of the activities that you perform more often as well. Again, to take your brain out of idle and put it in drive. And lastly is the sun. And in this case, that's going to be your mindset and your awareness. Because the most important thing you can think of as it relates to this analogy is what you water is going to grow. So if you water the weeds just as much as you water the flowers and plants that you want in the garden, they're both going to grow equally. But when you use your awareness and determine which activities take priority and where you're going to place more of your attention is going to determine what grows. And it's important to shine as much positivity on this process as possible, especially when you feel like you're in a dark place. So when you're at home and you're scrolling or you're lost in your phone or lost in thought, ask yourself, am I consciously or unconsciously choosing to do what I'm doing right now? Because without your awareness, you're going to slide back into that idle default mode, because that's what it's for, easier and easier and easier. So just like I referred to the exercise and the meditation, all these things being a bicep curl for your brain in that way, the same is true for the default mode and falling back into that pattern and routine. Because even when you think about the building blocks that I mentioned as it related to exercise and as you saw previously, think about how often that you're on your phone, and whether it's social media or YouTube or whatever the case it is, being in that default mode and being in an idle state, but getting these dopamine hits as much and as often as you do while you're on your phone is another building block that is strengthening that pathway. So it takes attention, focus, and awareness to be able to realize I am doing more reps and more bicep curls in the default mode in pathway 1 than I am in pathway 2. And so I hope this has been helpful. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. If you feel like you need a little help to get out of this rut and start creating these new pathways and stimulate that task positive network a little bit more, I have a link in the description to help you slowly build on these new habits in a way that's sustainable and to almost gamify this new pattern or this new routine that you're going down. And so until then, I'll see you in the next video.